Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for choosing Across the Fence. I'm Will Michael. Maple sugaring season is a sure sign of spring. You can smell it in the air as the steam rises from the sugar house. Over the years, Across the Fence has documented equipment and technology changes in the maple industry. This afternoon, Keith Silva tells us about another potential change that's still being researched by experts at UVM's Proctor Maple Research Center.
In theory, maple sugaring hasn't changed for centuries. Put a hole in a tree, collect the sap, and boil. The difference nowadays is in the practice.
The image that many people have of maple sugaring is still that we're using a lot of buckets and tractors or horses to draw around a sledge, and that's really not the way maple is done any longer.
For 68 years, scientists at the University of Vermont Proctor Maple Research Center have studied and tested maple trees. What starts here as a question or observation becomes an experiment, which in turn leads to changes in the maple industry. Proctor Maple has helped in refining tools like tubing, vacuum pumps, and reverse osmosis to allow sugar makers to maximize yields and get the most out of the short and sweet season. Maple is all about flow. On average, it takes 40 years for a maple tree to be mature enough to tap. At least, that's what most of us used to think.
So we were doing an experiment looking at where sap comes from in the tree, particularly under vacuum. We understand quite well how sap moves in trees normally, but with vacuum we're moving the sap around quite a bit more. So during the course of that investigation, we found that for at least part of the flow period, we were pulling water right out of the ground, through the roots, up through the stem and out of the tap hole. And in doing that, we decided that if that were in fact true, that the top became immaterial. And so to test that, we went and cut the top off a small tree and started to pull vacuum on it to collect the sap, and then found out that we could, in fact, get quite a good amount of sap from the tree in that manner. It definitely does not appear anything like traditional maple sugaring, other than the fact that we're using tubing.
That's right, sap from saplings.
Certainly there are a lot of head scratches and sort of, oh, that's interesting. But, I think we thought about this and worked on this for a long time without really being able to talk about it.
The research into tapping saplings began in 2010. Abby Vandenberg worked with Perkins to make this discovery.
The fundamental level at which I operate is scientists interested in how trees work. And from that level, this has been, just a really neat research topic to explore. Does this work physiologically? What is the physiology involved? This is very similar in some ways to lots of other existing agriculture. So as someone interested in agriculture, it just kind of seems like a natural extension of practices that we already use. To me, this represents one other tool in the toolbox for producers that might have some obstacles to expanding their operation.
This technology is still years away from being commercially available. Vandenberg and Perkins expect this plantation approach will benefit sugar makers with land constraints, or as a way to recoup losses after storm damage in 7 years instead of 40. No matter how beneficial this approach may become, Perkins knows there'll be doubters.
I think the general public really just needs to understand more about the process. When they first hear about it, we're killing baby trees, and that it's something that they think might swamp the maple world with syrup and could harm maple producers, or that the syrup is going to be different. Well, it isn't. The syrup is exactly the same. It's made by trees. It's sugar they're just pulling out of a tree. In terms of killing young trees, this doesn't kill them. They actually do quite well. They'll continue to live for a long period of time. The perception is sometimes not the same as the reality, and I think people, once they understand the process, will accept it more.
No matter if a maple is stately or skinny, the sap won't run up or down without cycles of freezing and thawing. When it comes to sugaring, it's Mother Nature who gets the final say.
Over time, I think the plantation method is probably going to become more and more commonplace. It's going to take a long period of time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's similar in many ways to lots of other crops. So if you look at vineyards, very, very different than they were a long time ago. Apple orchards, very, very different. New technology changing all the time. Christmas tree plantations. If you would ask your grandfather about going to cut a Christmas tree, you would not have gone to a plantation. They just didn't exist back then. And now it's a very strong tradition for people to go out and cut their Christmas trees in a plantation. And so just over a couple of generations, things change. And we don't really perceive them because they're happening over that kind of time frame, but they do change quite a lot.
As this plantation method shows, the experiments at the Proctor Maple Research Center always sugar off to a greater understanding of the world around us. In Underhill Center, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
As Keith reported, the sapling research began in 2010 and it remains ongoing at the Proctor Center. Research and special projects are common in high schools across Vermont. The work might focus on something close to home or tackling an issue even further away from home. When teachers at Champlain Valley Union High School challenged their students to do something that could change the world, the students did just that. Rebecca Gollin tells us more from Heinsberg.
Our English class this whole year has been a little bit different. And
it's the end of the school year, and Addie Tensing is reflecting on what she's learned.
We learned just everything. It's kind of a mix of science. We've learned to mix different subjects together and put it into something great.
Though it is a humanities class and there's the history component and the English component, we spend a lot of the time looking at ideas.
Every fall at Champlain Valley Union High School, humanities teacher Stan Williams and his team challenge their students to come up with an idea or innovation that could improve the world.
We start with kids thinking about what is it that you love, what is it that interests you, what are the things that keep you awake at night, what are the things that have impacted you or your family or that you see on the news or you read about that are interesting.
Tensing and her group decided to focus on the issue of water scarcity in Africa.
Water is something that we should all have. We use it every day in our showers, food, everything. And in Africa and South America and even in our own country and state, there are people who don't have access to it or limited access where it's really bad and can cause many diseases.
The students came up with an initial concept and then were matched with community partners to pitch their ideas and get advice on how to proceed.
I was in an interview with a guy in our community. He goes to Africa and he focuses on finding water for people. And all my ideas were using solar energy and kinetic energy. And both of them are very complex, so if they break, it's hard for people in Africa to find the resources to fix them. And so he suggested a natural way, and the only natural way I could really think of were plants. So I just Googled plants that purify water.
That Google search wound up being a turning point for the group.
We all started off with different innovations, and then we decided collaborating would be the best way to find our best innovation possible. So we found Sadie's idea, which was originally a different purification process, but then Sadie actually found the moringa seed, and then we all looked further into it and researched, and then we tested it, and we found out that the moringa seed is a great purifier for water.
The students ordered some moringa seeds online and began doing experiments with water they found in puddles in the school parking lot. The initial results seemed successful, with dirty water turning clear.
I looked at their dirty water and their clean water samples and was fairly amazed and said, well, let's do some testing actually. Let's take this to the lab and get some data.
Joshua Faulkner is the Farming and Climate Change Coordinator at the University of Vermont's Center for Sustainable Agriculture. He is a soil and water engineer and has spent time working on water quality issues in West Africa. He met with the group to offer feedback on their project.
Initially, they were looking at filtering with a coffee filter, and we talked about the availability of certain materials and and coffee filters not being widely available in West Africa. And I said, you know, but textiles, there are a lot of textiles available.
We were trying to design a prototype that would be realistic, so we took things that we kind of had around our house. So Addie brought in a Tide detergent bottle thing that has 2 openings, and since there's a lot of textiles around Africa, we thought we could use old t-shirts and cut them up to use as filters to take out the moringa seed. And so we've kind of just been working on a prototype that could be realistic for people in Africa.
The positive protons in the protein in the moringa are going to bind to the negative bacteria and viruses. So those are going to bind together or coagulate.
With a workable design for their water filtration system, the group got some water sample kits from Faulkner. They sent samples of both the original and the treated water to be tested for E. coli. The results were surprising.
It didn't just work, it worked really well. It purified the water.
The original contaminated water had a maximum probable of 1,300 E. coli, and the one we purified had 1, so that's really good. Drinkable.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Were you surprised?
Yeah, very surprised. After testing it, we kept thinking oh, I don't think this is gonna work. What happens if this doesn't? Because it was our whole entire end of the year project. And when it did, when we got it back in the mail, we were freaking out.
These results even impressed their scientific advisor.
Is that as impressive as it sounds?
Actually, I think it is. It's definitely not what I expected.
The group hopes to continue with the project next year and even travel to Africa at some point to share their innovation with the people they developed it for. And maybe just improve the world along the way.
And fresh.
In Heinsberg, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.
Thank you, Rebecca, and our congratulations to the CVU students for their outstanding work. That is our program for today. We know you have choices, so thanks for choosing us. I'm Will Michael, inviting you to join us back here each weekday afternoon for another visit Across the Fence.